Welcome, everyone. Let's get started. Today we are tackling one of the biggest challenges in AI collaboration, marathon conversations. We will learn how to maintain pinpoint accuracy across hundreds of messages and weeks of continuous work. Let's define what we mean by a marathon conversation. These are extended AI interactions that span days or even weeks, usually for massive projects like writing a book or coding an entire application. The foundation of this is the context window, which acts as Claude's active working memory. The basics are simple. As your conversation advances, every single prompt and response accumulates linearly. Why does this matter? Because if you just keep typing indefinitely, the AI's memory fills up with noise. How do we fix this? By actively curating the conversation. You must begin managing context the moment a chat extends beyond a single, simple task. In our deep dive, we recognize that while Claude can handle massive context windows, its true reasoning power depends on the quality of that context, not just the sheer volume. Take a look at this lifecycle flowchart. We start a new session and have high focus for the first few turns. But as we reach turn 20 and beyond, we see linear accumulation of tokens. Here we hit a critical decision point, context management. If you do nothing, you follow the red path down to noise and degradation. If you apply the tactics we will learn today, you follow the green path, maintaining a pruned, highly focused context window that keeps Claude incredibly sharp. Our biggest enemy in marathon sessions is context rot. What is context rot? It's the gradual degradation of the AI's performance over a long thread. Earlier details fade from its active memory, context gets muddled, and responses become increasingly generic. The basics here rely on a simple truth. Just because you can fit 1,000,000 tokens into Claude's memory doesn't mean you should. Why? Because filling the memory with obsolete drafts or 50 turns of debugging errors confuses the model. How do you spot context rot? It's obvious when Claude suddenly forgets a formatting rule you established on day one, or starts hallucinating facts. In our deep dive, we learn that unmanaged, bloated context doesn't just cause amnesia, it leads to higher API costs, hallucinations, and wildly inconsistent behavior. This state diagram maps the descent into context rot. We begin in a perfectly clean context state. However, after 50 or more turns of unchecked conversation, we transition into a bloated context. This inevitably triggers the context rot state. Inside this danger zone, the AI first forgets your initial instructions, which degrades into generic responses and finally leads to complete hallucinations. If left unmanaged, this ends in total task failure. To combat context rot, we introduce our first tactic, the checkpoint system. What is this? It's a structured, deliberate conversational pause that you execute every 10 to 15 exchanges. The basics involve you manually intervening to summarize progress. Why is this so effective? Because it forces Claude's attention mechanism to anchor onto a clean, high-signal summary of the current state, rather than forcing it to hunt through thousands of previous conversational tokens to figure out what's going on. How do you execute this? You literally type, "Let's checkpoint." Here is what we've covered so far. Here is what we are focusing on now. And here is what is next. In our deep dive, think of checkpointing as a psychological reset for the AI. It compresses the messy recent past into a highly dense, actionable directive for the immediate future. Let's trace the checkpoint protocol in this sequence diagram. The user and Claude work intensely through turns 1 to 10 on feature A. Before moving on and risking confusion, the user initiates the checkpoint. They explicitly state, feature A is done. Focus now is feature B. Claude acknowledges this reset. This perfectly cleans the conversational slate, allowing turns 11 through 20 to proceed with absolute clarity on the new objective. Our next tactic is the context journal, utilized alongside Claude projects. What is a context journal? It's a simple, persistent document that tracks key decisions, constraints, and milestones. The basics: if you use Claude's web interface, you upload this to a project. If you code, this is your Claude.md file. Why do we need this? Here is a critical warning. Claude projects organize your chats, but they do not automatically transfer conversational memory between different chats in that project. You are responsible for continuity. How do you maintain it? You perform a context refresh. At the start of a new chat, you paste your journal summary. Here is our project. Here are our constraints. Here is our current focus. Our deep dive calls this the serial project approach. You rely on systematic documentation, not magical AI memory, to keep your marathon going. Observe the architecture of a robust Claude project. At the top, we have our persistent context journal or Claude.md file. This does not automatically bleed into your sessions. Instead, you perform a manual context refresh to inject that knowledge into session 1 for the database. When session 1 finishes, you update the journal. You then inject that updated journal into session 2 for the backend API. It is a controlled, manual loop of knowledge preservation. Eventually, even with checkpoints, a conversation becomes too massive. This is when you execute the strategic split. What is it? It is intentionally ending a bloated conversation and starting a brand new one to restore peak AI reasoning. The basics are simple. When a thread gets too long, performance drops. Why do we split? Because starting a new chat clears out all the messy debugging, the failed attempts, and the conversational tangents that confuse the model. How do we execute this? Step 1. Save your final, important outputs as Claude artifacts. Step 2. Open a brand new chat in the same project. Step 3. Paste a concise summary of what was accomplished. When should you do this? Do it whenever you shift project phases like moving from outlining to drafting. In our deep dive, we see this completely prevents context rot. The new session only sees the polished conclusions, keeping token costs low and logic sharp. This flowchart maps the strategic split perfectly. We start on the left with a massive planning chat. When the chat gets too long, we hit the decision point. We save the final output as an artifact, generate a summary, and permanently close that chat. We then open a new chat, inject the summary and the artifact, and begin phase 2, drafting. We transition from a bloated, slow state into a lean, highly optimized state. For developers and advanced users, manual splitting can interrupt your flow. Enter automated context management, also known as compaction. What is compaction? It is an automated system that condenses earlier parts of a conversation. The basics: if you use Claude Code, you simply type the /compact command, and it automatically summarizes your history. Why is this powerful? Because it allows you to stay in the same session without suffering from context limits. How does it work under the hood? When token usage hits a critical threshold, Claude pauses, generates a highly structured summary of the entire chat, and literally replaces the massive history with that tiny summary block. For our deep dive, the beauty of compaction is that it preserves your static system rules and your Claude.md files while discarding the noisy chatter. It is an automated, seamless strategic split. Let's look at the sequence diagram for auto-compaction. The session reaches turn 50, hitting the token limit. Instead of crashing, the Claude API intercepts the request and triggers auto-compaction. It generates a dense summary of the 50 turns. It then replaces the massive conversational history with a tiny summary block. On turn 51, the session continues seamlessly, sending only the summary and the new prompt, completely resetting the token burden. Let's ground this in a real-time use case, the system architecture session. Imagine a developer tasked with designing a massive, production-ready system architecture over 3 weeks. The problem: if they do this in one chat, the AI will forget the database schema by the time it builds the front end. Here is the solution. Step 1. They use the progressive build. They don't ask for the whole app at once. Session 1 is pure planning. Session 2 is database only. Step 2. Handoffs and artifacts. At the end of session 1, they save the final specifications as a persistent Claude artifact. Step 3. The context refresh. To start session 2, they open a brand new chat, paste a concise summary of the planning phase, and reference the artifact. The outcome: by chaining clean, highly focused sessions together, they produce flawless, production-ready documentation over a marathon 3-week period without a single hallucination. This journey map shows the 3-week marathon. In week 1, the team drafts the specs, saves them as an artifact, and executes a strategic split to close the chat. In week 2, they open a new chat, inject the spec artifact, design the database schema, and save that as an artifact. In week 3, they inject all previous artifacts into a fresh chat to finalize the API. The AI's memory is perfectly preserved through artifacts, not messy chat logs. To conclude, let's review our best practices. First, avoid the marathon muddle. Don't just keep chatting forever. Take breaks, refresh context, and split the chat when needed. Second, avoid the file dump. Never just upload 50 files and say, "Fix this." Guide Claude's focus explicitly. Third, always adopt the progressive build. Build in phases from planning to final polish, never all at once. Finally, use the context journal. Keep an external document of your key decisions to copy-paste into fresh chats. Marathon success requires treating the AI like a brilliant colleague who occasionally suffers from amnesia. You are responsible for managing its memory. Thank you for joining this masterclass. I invite all learners to like, subscribe, and visit quicktechie.com for premium certification prep, including massive Q&A banks, full ebooks, audiobooks, full-length training, and expert interview guides. See you there. Our final mind map summarizes your toolkit for marathon success. You have 4 main branches. Tactic 1, checkpoints, pausing to summarize progress. Tactic 2, journals, tracking decisions in files like Claude.md. Tactic 3, splitting, closing bloated chats and saving work to artifacts. And Tactic 4, compaction, using automated tools to summarize history while preserving system rules. Master these 4 pillars, and your marathon conversations will be flawless.